Great. Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to Worldviews. Today we have on Robert G. Lee. Robert is a Christian comedian and one of Hollywood's top warm-up comics with experiences writing and appearing on TV shows such as Wings, The Drew Carey Show, and Perfect Strangers. Not to mention, Robert has a 30-minute performance on the entire Bible. Robert, thanks for coming on Worldviews.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Robert, can you just start us off by walking us through how you became a Christian, also how you got into Christian comedy?
We'll start off real light with the typical comment. I was raised in a Christian home, and Young Life has a very popular phrase. It said that it's that 12 inches from the head to the heart, and so raised Presbyterian, and I always tell people we're like Methodists without the excitement, but it never really sunk in because I always heard Jesus loved me, but you know what? My parents loved me, and I was secure. I didn't see any need to find a savior, and so it was in college. There's a guy named Josh McDowell. Now he's probably not your age group, but he wrote things like Evidence Demands a Verdict, More Than a Carpenter, and he came to our school, and he talked about the end times. I was raised Presbyterian. We never got to that part of the Bible. It was always Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're good. But Josh laid out this plan that God had that I'd never heard before. And he showed all the predictions in the Old Testament that pointed toward Jesus. And then he talked about all the predictions about the end times. And this blew me away. And I said, if a God is that big and can make that many things tie together all for this one Savior, I can't deny it anymore. The plan became too big. And so that was that moment where I checked a little box on the back of a card that says, do you want to hear more? It's like, yes, I want to hear more. And Campus Crusade, who would sponsor the event, came over in about 30 seconds, made me bow my head, accept Jesus, and that was it. And then they discipled me for a couple of years. And so that was it. I was 18 when I finally crossed over, and I was a Christian. So then tumultuous times. I was in college in the 70s, very wild times, not a very Christian environment, but somehow I stayed on that path, and then I started doing comedy. When I started doing comedy, it was that weird. I just didn't fit. I didn't fit in the clubs. So I would go to the clubs, and my material just wasn't growing. And I've been doing it for about 5 years. And I knew I wanted to do comedy. I knew I wanted to be in sitcoms, but I couldn't. I just couldn't get over that hump of material because everything I did was for people who couldn't relate to me. So I was a Christian. I was married by that time. I had one kid, one on the way, and my experiences weren't relating to the people who they were young, they were single, they just wanted to come out and have a good time and then go home and do what they're going to do. We were foreplay basically for a lot of college couples, and so I made this big decision. I said I will not work in the clubs anymore. I'm done. I'm going to go work in the churches. I don't know what's going to happen. I think I'm giving up my career, but it's the only place that I feel like I fit. And when I found the church, I found my people. And it was like, oh, this is what I've been missing all along. There they had people, kids from junior high all the way up to grandmas, and I could relate to them. And when I did that, what I thought was this huge leap of faith was one of these, you're a moron for not doing this years earlier. My material exploded. And I just started writing all this material about kids and family and everything that I could relate to, that they could relate to. And uh, it became my career path, all because of what I thought was this huge faith walk where God was saying, this is where you should have been all along.
Yeah, and it must have been kind of a full circle moment for you because I read that Josh McDowell must have saw you perform at some point as well.
It was very fun because later on, when I was on his show, he said, "How'd you become a Christian?" And I told him the whole story, and he goes, "Are you serious?" I go, "Absolutely." I was doing one of the things you mentioned was I do the Bible, and I could do 30 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. I did it on the Huckabee Show, several different places, but Josh loved that routine, and I started doing it for him. So he, when he saw me the first time, he said, "Boy, it takes a great talent to be clean in this culture, and man, you hit it out of the park." So I'm kind of screwing up the quote there, but Josh has always been a great guy, and that is appreciate what I've done, and I owe my life to him. So that was a serendipitous moment when I got to tell him how I became a Christian.
Yeah, and I'm curious too because you read about kind of pre-show rituals that comedians would do. Do you have any of those? I assume you would pray before shows, correct?
It's not just before the show. And that, I think that's a mistake people make. I teach a comedy class for up and coming comedians. I say there are 10 rules, 10 commandments, if you will, on what to do before you go on stage. And it's preparing for the audience. But number 4 on that list is pray. And I don't pray just before I go out on stage. I pray beforehand because I'm praying for the people. The big mistake a lot of comedians make is they say, I want to get laughs. He goes, no. And Michael Jr. talks about this. And I think it's one of his best quotes. He says, no, you're there to give laughs, not to get laughs. And so before I go on stage, yes, I have to do mental preparation, but the prayer is to lift the people in the audience up. Doesn't matter if they're Christian, doesn't matter if they're secular. I want to make those people release their burdens, feel good about life, and then maybe in a cruise setting or a business setting, let them know I'm a Christian. You can come talk to me later. It's not proselytizing, but it's lifting the people up and letting them know we're just here to have a good time. So, and just to give you a little story on that, how I really came to this conclusion of it's not me on stage, it's me and God and praying and lifting people up. I did a show one time. It was in a college town. It was hot. It was humid. I'm not insulting anybody, but it was a very ardent lesbian who just talked the whole time. And I'm going to there, how am I going to follow this? What am I going to do? And it was a very average to mediocre night. Let's be honest. I didn't do well. Drove home, woke up the next morning, little tap on the shoulder from God saying, you did that on your own, didn't you? And I went, oh, I did. I didn't pray beforehand. I didn't. And so from that point on, it became, no, God is my partner. So the prayer is not just, hey, let me go up and lift these people up, but it's also, God, would you please come on stage with me and be my partner? Because we all, as a Christian, you have the Holy Spirit inside of you. You need to operate in life with that partner, nudging you, giving you direction, showing you where to go. And if I can go out on stage and I don't feel it's just me, I actually do much better because most Christians, I believe, have the problem of being competent. They can actually exist and make it in this world without God's help, but it's never as good. It's never as good or as powerful as when you have God on your side. And when I started changing it from I'm going on stage to we're going on stage and we're not here for me, we're here for them, it changed everything around.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and I'm curious too because you mentioned you performed at college, and I I assume your most consistent venues are probably maybe churches or as well as regular comedy venues. But what's the most consistent type of venue that you're asked to perform at? And also, what are the most unique venues you've performed at as well?
I have the very strange privilege of, you mentioned at the beginning, TV's top warm up comic. I've done that for over 30 years. Now, most of the TV comedy, as far as the 3 camera sitcoms, has died and gone away. So I don't do it anymore. I'm not, that's not part of who I am. But for 30 years, it was a lot of fun. It really was. I started off on Golden Girls, Designing Women, and Perfect Strangers, did the pilots of Frazier, Everybody Loves Raymond. And so you talk about a unique audience. The people come there thinking, oh, it's just going to be a half hour to film a sitcom. No, it takes 4 to 5 hours. I always tell people when the Golden Girls started, they were in their 20s. It takes a long time to film these shows. So I would, but to be up in an audience for example, Wings was one of my favorite shows. It wasn't a huge hit. I mean, I did the last episode of Cheers, but Wings was a consistent time, really good people. Just Shoot Me was fun. You brought up the Drew Carey show. There were certain audiences that came in and they were ready to laugh, and I got to ride that wave and have a great time for the 3 to 4 to 5 hours that we were there. That is a unique experience where I'm just ad-libbing, having fun. The audience is having fun. The stars are right there. They come over to talk to me. It was just a great time. Nothing I've done outside of that, whether it's at a church or a corporation, is ever compared to the feeling of having 400 rabid fans go crazy for The Perfect Strangers or for Wings or for Ted Danson on Becker. Those were really fantastic times. And those are members that I'll keep with me forever.
Yeah, I guess which show were you most proud of? I guess like what work did you do that you're most proud of amongst those shows?
There are just certain times when you get to strike lightning in a bottle where everything's clicking. And there was one of those moments, and when I say moment, it lasts for 3 or 4 hours because you keep coming back to the same thing or you weave stories through. I had a band. which was fantastic. And Wings and Old Christine, the New Adventures of Old Christine, were the two shows. I was probably the funniest on Perfect Strangers because they had 400 people. But those other shows, when you have a band and a guy be walking down on the stage, just some guy putting the props up or something, and I would make up a song about him, and the band would kick in, and it became this very creative mix that just it was just a blast. It really was. The creativity and the willingness for the audience to go along with the ride. Like, we're not here to watch a stand up show, but after 3 or 4 hours, they go, okay, what are you going to do next? And so playing around on those shows, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm also curious too, because you mentioned earlier you're talking about making yourself presentable for people to maybe approach you after the shows, just in case, maybe possibly talking to them about Jesus and whatnot. Were there a lot of instances of that?
I will say every time I go on a cruise now, it's very clear from the way I talk that I go to church, that my family goes to church, I believe in God, and people come up and they'll mention things like when you on Huckabee, I did the Bible in 6 minutes, and people come up. There's a thing called they want an adult show on some of the cruises, and I tell them I can't do an adult show. I can do adult material about adult things and babies and things like that, and relationships, but I'm not going to be dirty. So I actually had to write a routine about that. And when I'm done with that show, people come up afterward and they'll just whisper in my ear and they go, "Hey, I love the 6 minute Bible." It's like, oh, so it's like Christians are coming to the show to see if I'm going to be consistent with my beliefs. But other times people come up. Probably my favorite comment, it was when I recorded A to Z, which was, I don't know, video number 5 or 6. A guy came up and put a note in my hand and said, "Well, you talked about Jesus, but you made me laugh, so I was okay with it." And other people say, "Look, I'm a liberal professor from Colorado. We're as far apart as you can be, but I thought you were funny." So those kind of things are great. But other things happen where people come up and they will open up a conversation. Um, some pastors will come up and say, "Hey, your wife is a therapist and you do a lot of comedy. Would you do a marriage retreat at our church?" And so those connections come up. But the best thing to ever happen in those places, and it happens for the most part in churches, is somebody will come up and they're hurting and they just need to talk. It's like, okay, this is the time. And a lot of times it's at marriage conferences, but sometimes people just they need to unburden themselves, or they come and say, "I haven't laughed in such a long time. It's been a really rough road, and I really appreciate what you did for me today." So those are very humbling experiences. They don't make you cocky at all. They don't get you.
Yeah.
They don't. You don't fill yourself with yourself and say, "Okay." It's. I talk to pastors a lot, and the common experience with pastors is whenever they do a sermon and they're really on, people will come up and they will mention something that they didn't even say in their sermon, and it's just proof that you are a vessel for the Holy Spirit to spark something in the other person. And that has happened to me time and time again with my comedy shows. They'll mention something I didn't even do. But it's like, okay, good. Well, I'm glad that touched you and I'm glad that meant something. It's because the Holy Spirit's leading them through. You say one thing, that sparks something, and all of a sudden they land on something that they needed to find. Those are kind of the miraculous little gifts that God gives you as you go along.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you have a 6-minute Bible performance and a 30-minute one as well?
Yeah, the whole thing was officially, when I first did it, I did the entire Bible in like 27 minutes. And then, all right, I'll cut it down to 8 minutes. I'll cut it down to 6 minutes. So depending on where I go, people say, "Hey, it's just become this." The truncated version is you can just zip through in 6 minutes. It's a lot of impressions. It's a lot of voices, but I go through the entire Old Testament, entire New Testament, and I end up with Louis Armstrong singing about the streets of gold. So yeah, it's a fun, it's a showpiece. It's a season or a set ender if people in a church want that. I rarely do it. I never do it on a cruise. I wouldn't do it in a business, but for the right place and people want it, especially after the second or third time I've been someplace, it's nice to bring that out.
Okay, so you sort of sometimes you'll tailor your jokes for certain audiences?
Oh, always, always.
Always.
And by that I mean I'm not going to change who I am, but
Sure.
if it's a marriage retreat, yeah, I'm going to do a half hour on the differences between men and women and the how hard it is to stay married and what we're supposed to do to sacrifice for each other. I'll do my marriage material. If you're performing for a high school crowd, for example, what I've discovered is that the knowledge or the life experience only goes up so high. So I can talk about relationships to a high school crowd. I can talk about childhood to a high school crowd, but I can't talk about marriage and I can't talk about having kids because they haven't reached that point experientially. A retirement crowd, they love to hear retirement material. A singles crowd, they want to hear single material. They don't want to hear a lot about things that they can't relate to. So yes, you. The whole point when you're a comedian is you get ammunition. Your material is ammunition. So I've released 10 videos now. So I obviously have a lot of material. Each one is an hour long. So I go back and, okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to do my marriage material here. Oh, I can bring this in. Oh, this will be fun for this crowd. So yeah, you tailor it for whatever audience you're going to perform in front of.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, how long did the whole 30-minute to 27-minute to 6-minute Bible joke take to really create? That must have taken at least months, right?
Oh, it took 2 years.
Two
It took
years, okay.
it took 2 years of from the inception, the conception to execution, which is probably the wrong word to use, but you try it out on stage and you have to memorize it and you have to, oh, that's too long, that doesn't fit, they don't know who that character is, that came off wrong. No, it took 2 solid years of work to build that. But every act you do, every time I put out a new hour, that really means I've been working on that for about 2 to 3 years before then, before I tape it, because it takes a long time to work out everything, every joke, making it tight, finding out how to attack things. But yeah, the Bible took a long time to get through. Oop, let me just turn this off. Sorry.
You're good.
That's good. It's on.
Because
It's
I can
on
only
silent.
imagine.
I'll leave a message.
Because I can only imagine how good it must have felt once you finished the joke and then you performed it for the first time to try it out and you got a good reaction.
Oh, it's the best. It's the because when you're a comedian, it's like I think this is great, and then the problem comedians make is that there are three people to blame or three groups to blame when a joke doesn't fly. You blame yourself, you blame the joke, and then you blame the audience. Most comics go out there and they blame the audience. They go, "Oh, over your head." It's like, no, no, no. You took too long between the setup and the punchline. You didn't give a good enough twist. It wasn't clever enough. It wasn't in a funny arena. But when you find that thing that hits and the audience responds, boom! It is great. It is wonderful to have that. It's not that it's that rare, but it takes a long time to work out the craft to have enough confidence to go out. And I never go out and just do a joke without trying it first on several other comedians in writers groups that I've had,
Mm.
because you don't want to go out unarmed, but you also don't want to go out untested.
Yeah, those moments must be so amazing. It's like for you, what was that moment that you realized like, oh, I finally think I made it in this industry?
And I always love that question because there is no such moment. There is no time when you feel like you've made it, because there's always somebody who is doing so much better than you. There's always somebody who's doing not even half of what you're doing, and they're jealous of you. Everything is perspective. So
Mm,
I have been fortunate enough that I've done this for 35, 36, 37 years now. And I knew pretty early on I could make my living doing this. And you think that you would get that feeling of, well, I've made it. No, it is a constant battle to reinvent yourself, to come up with new material. You're only as good as your last joke. That's an old quote from Will Rogers. You're always working. So the feeling of I've made it is a feeling of complacency. And that's something a comedian cannot afford to have. Now, a singer can. A singer, if you're a singer and you can get one, two, three, four, five great hit songs, you can probably play Vegas or around the country for the rest of your life and just sing those same songs until you die. Pete Townsend from The Who has many, many hits, and he says, I can't tell you how tired I am of playing My Generation. If I never play it again, I'll be happy. Musicians have it different than comedians. A comedian always has to come up with new material. So, financially, yes, there's a feeling of, all right, I'm secure, I've got enough money, and I'm making enough money on these gigs. Whereas other people are coming up and they're scrambling, they're making $10 on an open mic or $200 after they've driven 5 hours someplace. That's a tough life. When you've made it and you can actually get money from corporate events and churches and cruises, then you can feel a little more secure. But really, my whole career comes down to a faith in God, because I have confidence in what I'm doing because I feel he is working out my career for me. So I don't stress over. And I told my wife this last night. It's like, oh, look, October. It was completely open. There was nothing in October. And now I have dates, all the dates filled on the weekends, which means I get to spend the week with my family. But it's enough to make it through that month. So you have the high months, you have the low months. It's always this roller coaster. When you're a comedian, you live on the roller coaster. And I don't know, I don't think I have one comedian friend who says, I've made it. And these are successful comics. You're always working. You never know when the next gig is going to come. And that insecurity is good because it keeps you hungry.
Yeah, let's talk about that roller coaster then. What was the most challenging portion of your career, would you say?
I think most people would say it was COVID, but that wasn't it for me. The writer strike back in I think it was '07 or '08 or '09. It happened with the recession and a writer strike. So there was no work. And I was not prepared. And I was like, how am I going to live for? Could be 6 months, could be 9 months, could be a year, and the finances are dwindling. Really tough time. Now, COVID was fascinating because God knew it was going to happen before I did, and a lot of people were caught with their pants down. Let's be honest. It's like they weren't prepared. Nobody was prepared for it. But COVID started in March of 20. In 19 September of 19, I submitted my latest comedy album to Sirius Radio. Took them about 6 months to okay it and for the to play it, and then it takes a couple months for the residuals to come in. COVID hit in March. I started getting residuals in April, and it was
Hmm.
enough. With then there were stimulus packages, small business loans, and shows that I was working on paid us for. We have to cancel the series, so we're going to pay you for the rest of the shows. I made it through COVID with no problem, with no gigs, because God set everything up beforehand. So
Hmm.
I've been fortunate is probably the wrong word. I've been faithful. God has been faithful. He has blessed me time and time again. And I'm not saying I'm rich, not even close. No, things when that recession happened, my home value completely dropped. We sold it years later, and we weren't upside down, but that was my retirement, and I lost my whole retirement with that. So we had a nice home with a lot of value, and it all went away. So I will just keep working until I think I can quit 15 years after I die. That's what I've calculated, but that's good.
Yeah, but even as I feel like as a comedian though, do you even want to ever retire? I feel like comedians are so in love with doing comedy that they just want to do it until they drop.
You're 100% right. My wife says, I will know you're dead when you don't wake up in the morning with an idea. I woke up this morning with an idea. It's like she knows that is how I am made. I tell everybody God gave each person like a little sliver of his personality, and mine is creativity. So it's not just comedy. If I'm writing a script, if I'm writing a book, there's always an idea going on. Oh, I never want to stop. I can't stop. And I know when you do stop, you atrophy and you die. There's nothing in the Bible that I found about retirement. So I will just keep going. Now, stand up comedy, there will be a time when I will get tired of schlepping my big suitcase down the stairs, over to the airport, on an airplane, and get back and spend a whole day traveling there, day traveling back. That's the that's the not fun part of the job. I tell people, you don't pay me to do comedy. You pay me to travel because it's exhausting. And so I think probably in 10 years, I might be tired of that. But I'll always write books. I'll always write scripts. I'll always be creative because that's just who I am.
Yeah, and speaking of traveling, I'm curious because I assume you've been to most of the 50 states, if not all, and then a few countries, I imagine.
These cruises will take you out to. I was at Easter Island, which you south part of. It's a little island way, way, way off of Chile. That was fantastic. I've been to Naples, Italy. I've been to some wonderful places. Now, there's still places that I want to go, but those were on cruises.
Yeah.
I can't go perform in Naples, Italy, or in South America because the cultural boundary. It's not language all the time; it's the culture. Even if you learn the language, the culture is so different that they don't understand American humor. On the cruises, Australians will understand what I'm doing, as do people from England and Canada. But people from other countries, even though you may speak the language, they don't understand the culture well enough. Asian countries, for example, will just sometimes just stare at me. Now, if they're raised in America, they get it. But if they're actually from an Asian country and speak English, culturally, there's a big divide for humor. Not just understanding the news and the language, but humor is the great divide.
Sure. Okay. And I'm curious too. Then, what were your favorite American cities that you performed in?
Generally, the best places to perform, the Midwest and the South. And the reason for that is people go to church there. So culturally, we have a lot to share. I rarely perform around the East Coast, New York, and up to Maine. I don't do. I've done some in Virginia, but the further south you go, the more references we have with each other. I was raised in the Midwest. I'm out in California now, so California audiences are good, but the best ones I would go Texas, maybe even Kansas, Kansas all the way over to Florida and down. Oh, those are just the best audiences. And audiences that are free with their emotions, which usually comes out to be if you can get to a black Pentecostal church in the South, it is the best audience ever because they are so free with their emotions and they will just shout back out at you and it's just a party and it's so much fun. Whereas if you go north in Minnesota, they're cold all the time. And so it's a very reserved, indeed, that's
Mm.
funny. It's just, it's a tougher crowd, but you have to realize, okay, this is your level of laughter. You're having a great time right now. I wish you'd tell your face, but this is the best time you possibly could have. But the South, oh man, it's fun.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and I mean, all comedians go through the heckling portions of things. So I'm curious for you, when you get heckled, I assume there's been times when people heckled you for the fact that you were Christian.
Well, on the TV shows I worked, I would get heckled by and insulted and backstabbed by the writers and the people on the show, and that was very interesting. And other shows, they would come and say, "Hey, Bob, this is about God. You're going to like tonight's script." Because I went to him one time. I went to one show and I said, "Look, guys, I don't care who wins the debate. I love the fact that tonight you actually had an honest debate between one person who loved God and one person who didn't." And they said, "Oh, you're not joking. You're telling the truth." Oh, yeah, I'm absolutely serious. Let the audience decide, but don't make it a one-sided slam. Let the people debate the issue. And I love the fact that you did that tonight. And so when you have an honest discussion, people see you as a real person as opposed to some stereotype. But no, I was in in the other room and I'd hear people mock me. It's like, oh, laugh at me, I'm a Christian, and the other writers would laugh. It's like, so that's what they think of me. Okay, well, all right, I can live with that, and that's just the way it is. But most churches, people aren't going to heckle you, and people who don't agree with you in a club audience, heckling is that weird thing that you don't give them the power. You let if they're going to say something, let them say it, and then you give them enough rope to hang themselves, and you have fun with them. Don't make fun of them because you can exacerbate the problem very quickly. But when you ask that question, it made me think. I really have never been publicly mocked. Now I know my career has been hurt because I'm a Christian. I haven't moved on to certain areas because I'm a Christian, and you know what? It's absolutely fine. But as far as heckling, the worst ever, as far as a heckle, wasn't somebody who intended to do it. It was a small boy, and he had Down syndrome, and I didn't realize it, but he had very sensitive hearing, which I found out later is atypical of people who have Down syndrome. They have very sensitive ears. And so I'm on a microphone, and this poor kid is in the front row. He wanted to see a comedy show, evidently, and I'm starting to talk on a microphone, and he put his hands over his ears, and I'm telling this was 45 minutes of this. He said, "Ow, you're hurting me." And I was like, what am I doing? You're hurting me. I'm so sorry. And I backed off the microphone, and the people in the back said, "We can't hear you." So I bring the microphone closer. Ow! And then take it off. We can't hear. So 45 minutes of that. And I'm trying to end with a message on Jesus accepting people. And then Jesus said, "Ow!" And it was one of those nights like, okay, that'll go down in the books as the worst show ever. But and no parent came forward to get this little boy. You can't say, could someone take this boy out of here? Could a crying baby, you can kind of joke about it, but this young boy was just there for 45 minutes in pain, and I caused it, and that was so. That's my worst heckle I've ever had.
That's funny. And as a comedian, do you have like a Mount Rushmore of comedians of your favorite ones?
Oh, sure. Oh, I have the comedians that I love, and I can actually list where I was at certain times in my life and which comedians influenced me. Because when I was a kid, and I don't know if you're not even allowed to say it anymore, but he is on the Mount Rushmore, and that's Bill Cosby. And here, so I was a white kid in Indiana who could relate to a black guy from Philadelphia, and his childhood stories traversed race and age and economic status. And it was just, I memorized everything he did. Of course, we found out all the things he did, and it became. But he is still the best storyteller, hands down, bar none. He was the first one. I saw him on TV, and I said, "That's what I want to be," and I'm honest about that. Then, as I went on, I was too insecure in high school to go ask girls out on dates, so I would go to silent movie theaters. They had one back in Indianapolis, and Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, the Marx Brothers fell in love with all those old silent movies and the early 30s and 40s. Fell in love with that. Then I got a little bit older. It was Woody Allen and Monty Python. Monty Python was huge for me, and that became the next bit. So those aren't all stand-up comedians, but if you talk about the Mount Rushmore, if I were to say the top three would be Lenny Bruce, Bill Cosby, Richard Pryor. Everybody bases one style of comedy or another off of
Uh,
those three people. You cannot get better. Now, two are extremely profane, but they were creative and hilarious. And Bill Cosby was the cleanest, and he's the worst of the three. So it really hurts me to say that. But those, as far as just straight comedy, great people. Now, today, I like Jim Gaffigan. I like Jerry Seinfeld. There's some really funny people out there. Nate Bargatze. There's some great people doing some great stand up comic. But as far as the Mount Rushmore, those three faces would be up there.
and then films. What's your Mount Rushmore of comedy films?
Funniest, best, uh, Princess Bride would be up there. That as far as things that my family quotes. What about Bob? Princess Bride, and then you get to my favorites, which would be going back to, yeah, the Marx Brothers and Duck Soup is one of the funniest films I've ever seen, and Charlie Chaplin in modern times. Some of those early, and Buster Keaton in Young Sherlock, creative, wonderful films back in the 30s and 40s. There's one called Ball of Fire with Gary Cooper, and it's basically playing the there's like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That's hilarious. I love Some Like It Hot with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. That one's a great one. So there's certain films in each era that I would pick. It's like, that's the best of that era. That's the best of that era. I love film. So I could stay here for about 6 days talking about films. I'm
Oh
not a big
shoot.
fan of rowdy and crazy. Like, I would not put National Lampoon's Vacation, but a lot of people would. I put Ferris Bueller up there. I think Ferris Bueller is brilliant. So films that I've seen over and over and over again, it's a handful of them, but I go back to them every couple years and say, all right, I've got to go watch like Notting Hill. That's my favorite romantic comedy. And it's not a ha ha comedy all the time, but there's some fall down funny moments in it. So, but as far as pure comedy, what about Bob makes me laugh all the time with Bill Murray and Groundhog Day. I just think Bill Murray's hilarious, and you could probably throw Ghostbusters in there too. I love pretty much anything Bill Murray does. I just start laughing. So,
Cool. Let me pick your brain about movies then. What do you think's what's your personal you can say top three, four, or five best movies you've ever seen that are not comedies?
well, um, It's a Wonderful Life is probably my top all-time film of all time. Jimmy Stewart and the story of what life would be like if you weren't there is just a wonderful story of God's grace weaving behind the scenes on how you get what you need, not what you want. So I think that is brilliant. I also love Casablanca. Casablanca, one of the all-time best films, and it was almost a mistake that it got made. Then you go to African Queen, another brilliant film, just a relationship between two people that hate each other and slowly but surely fall in love. I'm a romantic at heart, evidently, because I love all these old films. But as far as just great, great, great films, yeah, you're not going to be able to beat The Godfather. The Godfather is so good. It's just everything about it, the way it works, and the story of it's. And what I want you to understand in all this is stories that really work all echo the Bible. And when people hear that, they go, what are you talking about? Every story that hits it out of the park, that resonates in your heart, it echoes the Bible beat for beat for beat. So it has what's called the inciting incident. Something exciting happens, and it takes our story off in a trajectory. Wizard of Oz has the tornado. That's your inciting incident that takes her. And then you have this adventure, and the adventure goes along beat for beat for the Bible. And then the main character is introduced. Um, Jesus would be coming in the second act of the story of the Bible, and he's tempted. And the hero has to double down and say, "No, I'm not. I'm not going to get out. I'm going to stay with it." And then you come to the crisis. I was in film school, and they said, "What's the crisis of the Bible?" And everybody looked around and said, "The crisis of," yeah, it goes, "What's that point of no return where the lead character dies?" And we went, "Oh, it's the crucifixion." They said, "Yes, the Bible is one story, and the crucifixion is the crisis of that story. The resurrection is the climax where he defeats death, and then the resolution is heaven." So every story you see, I'm telling you, beat for beat, it's not the story, it's not the hero's journey by Campbell, it is the Bible beat for beat. And so whenever I see a story, I always break it down after. I go, oh, yeah, it fits there, right there it is. That's, yep, that's the story of the Bible. So that's how I whenever I watch a really good film, invariably it matches up beat for beat.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And do you ever watch like scary one horror movies or
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, Get Out, Halloween. I'm not a slasher guy. I don't really like that
sure,
much. But
same.
I can remember there was a film called Wait Until Dark, and that's way back in the '60s with Audrey Hepburn, way before your time. But the theater was sold out, and so I had to sit on the floor and watch it next to my sister because I got to sneak in with my sister and her friends, and we were all screaming and jumping the whole time through. So. And early Alfred Hitchcock movies, from Psycho to, and I remember being a kid watching The Man Who Knew Too Much, and there's somebody supposed to be in a basket and they're stabbing swords in there. These things are imprinted in my mind that I can't get out of. Scary movies are so much fun. A good scare, worth it. I mean, Aliens to me is brilliant. That is the quintessential. We're in a cabin and a monster's coming in, but of course it's outer space and there's many aliens coming in. I don't like Alien that much, but Aliens by James Cameron, I love it. I think it's so good. So good scary films. Oh yeah, they're so much fun.
You're speaking my language with Alien because I just saw Alien Romulus and I saw the first Alien the day before. And I was like, the Alien franchise fans are gonna hate me for this, but Alien Romulus was better. I didn't think Alien was all that good. The first one, I just was not.
No, it's not. It's not that good. It's just a lot of gross out stuff. But Cameron figured out how to make it really frightening. So I'm gonna have to go watch Romulus. You think it's good?
Oh yeah, you should definitely see it. Yeah, I haven't seen all the aliens, obviously, but someone described it as a good mixture of the first. It was like the horror of the first one, the action of the second one, then elements from like the fourth one, I guess, all put into one movie. So yeah, definitely recommend it for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I also I'm curious too. Do you have any cool stories of you interacting with other famous comedians?
Well, I've got to say, not that many stories of comedians. I've got a lot of stories with sitcom stars because
Okay, yeah,
Suzanne Summers on Step by Step, and Patrick Duffy, and then um, Julie Louis Dreyfus would come up and give us all a hug before we start the show on Old Christine. Of course, everybody knows her from Seinfeld. And Ted Danson would actually play around with me, which was fun. It was on the series Becker, and we had a thing whenever he was just bored and somebody else was in a scene and he's not in it. He would kind of give me the high sign, and I would just go. I would tell the audience how Ted is so full of himself and thinks he's the greatest guy in the world. And he would pretend to overhear me and get upset and call the stage manager over and have me fired publicly. I don't know. It's just those kind of things are just fun. And when you get somebody who's so big and they actually know who you are and come up and hug you in between shows, that's kind of cool. It
yeah,
doesn't make your head big, but I'll tell you one thing that as far as interaction with stars, there are some people who are very insecure, and I'm not going to mention their names. And as far as a famous comedian, they're insecure, and so they feel like that they like if you're getting laughs, then they're not, and therefore they don't like you because of the reaction you're getting. So stars who are secure are fantastic to work with. The ones that are insecure, oh, they're a pain. The rule in Hollywood is you become what you always were. So if you were a generous, nice person, you're going to be grateful for the job and for the opportunity you have. But if you were a jerk and you were hiding it and pretending to be nice just until you can get that big position where you can look down on everybody, oh, those people are insufferable. So yeah, I've run into a couple of those.
Yeah. Have anyone of that stature ever pulled you aside to talk to you about God as well?
Oh no, no.
No, never.
I've worked with Kirk Cameron, and everyone knows Kurt's a Christian. No, that just there's not a lot of there's the knowledge of, well, we know you're a Christian, and okay, but there's not discussion of as to why, unless they have a Christian bent.
Mm.
It's just like you are. That's where you are. This is where I am. Let's work together.
Yeah. What do you think you would have done though if you weren't a comedian?
It's the same question of will I ever retire? It would be something creative. So I know that there
Yeah.
are ad agencies, and so you could do. I'm an old cartoonist. I'm not good enough to be an animator, but I definitely would fall in some place in the writing realm, and it was just with that sarcastic bend. So it wouldn't have been a sportscaster. The news would have been interesting, but I'm stuck in this job where I get to be creative, and whatever I make up, I get to use it to make my living. So it's very much an entrepreneurial mom and pop comedy shop. I write the comedy, I record the comedy, I sell the comedy, and then you market yourself. So I don't know how to work another job. I worked in a church for a long time. I was the drama director for a Presbyterian church, and so that was leading a group of people and writing and directing. That was a lot of fun. It wasn't comedy, but it was taking an idea from, again, concept, execution, and everything in between to try and fit what the sermon needed. So that was so maybe something in the theater would have certainly been a natural fit. But yeah, this is a nice niche that I fell in.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you too, how much do you enjoy teaching comedy? That must be such an awesome thing to do for you.
It's a great thing when you see talent. That's when it's fun. I don't know if you know who Christian McCartney is, but he is absolutely hilarious, and he's got like 60 million views on TikTok. I mean, he just exploded. But he's got this rubber face, and so he was in my comedy class, and that was so much fun to watch him. There are other people. It's like, wow, you have it. When you find that one person who has it, you want to nurture them and mentor them, and just it's fun to see them go. And then you have the painful ones, like, all right, you're just not getting it. You're not seeing where you're missing it, and I don't think I can help. It's like art. I can teach
Yeah.
you how to paint, and either you have it inside of you and you can come up with great art, or you're going to be a paint by numbers guy the rest of your life. So it is a lot of fun when you see the light bulb go off, and it's also a little bit frustrating when people just don't get it, and you explain it this way, explain it that way, and it's like Tom Hanks in League of Their Own. If you ever saw that, and he's trying not to yell at the person who's the young lady who's the shortstop, and you could just see his frustration. He just goes, "You're missing the open man." And she goes, "Oh, okay." And she just walks off. He just wants to strangle her. So
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
you feel that way. So it's the hard of comedy that makes it good. And some people just find it, and they become who they were always meant to be. And other people, it's a good lesson. It's like, this isn't who you're meant to be. Norman Lear is very clear. He says there are many ways to use comedy. He started off, he eventually wrote All in the Family and The Jeffersons and Sanford and Son. He was big in the 70s and 80s. I worked with him in a couple sitcoms till he just passed away this last year. He always said, you don't have to do stand up, but you use that as a base. Then you can go on and be a writer. You can go on and be a director. You can go on and do theater. But that comedy base is really, really great. And it's fun to see people's eyes go, oh, I get it. They don't have to do stand up. They can go into 100 different careers, but we all use the same kind of twist, exaggeration, extrapolation. We use the same tools to create something fun and funny.
Yeah, because you also have to have the psychology ready to accept absurd amounts of failure, especially also to get ready to bomb in front of crowds of people over and over again. Because I'm sure there's even times where your comedic peers think your joke is funny, but that doesn't necessarily mean the crowd's going to think it's funny. And then there's like a really weird contrast there.
Well, if you bomb over and over and over again, you're not a comedian. But a joke, and if a joke bombs over and over and over again, to use Jay Leno's advice, cut it. So Seinfeld says it's so frustrating to be a professional comedian and present your material in front of people who have no sense of humor, and they tell you what's funny. So I
Mm,
understand the frustration there. And yes, it is hard, but you don't go out there with the mindset of, oh, what happens if I bomb? No, you go out there with a mindset of success, saying, this is going to work. Now, it may not work as well as I want it to tonight, but it will eventually because this audience is going to tell me what works. So I'm going to keep that and I'm going to trim and shape and fix it so that the next time it'll be better. The next time it'll be better. And eventually it's like, boom, there it is. Now it's working. It just takes you a while to get there. So you don't go out there with a, well, that bombed. And if it does, you don't do that again. But you go out there with the mindset of, this is a work in progress. And by the way, you never just do that routine. You do your A material, you put in the new stuff, and then you do your A material. So you can judge it next to the two routines. I know this one works, and I know this one works. I got to work on this one. Sometimes it flies, and sometimes it doesn't. Again, to quote Seinfeld, he goes, every joke is trying out for the team. And sometimes that joke just isn't strong enough. You go, you tried. I tried you out in different positions. I tried you, put you at the beginning of the act, end of the act. You're just not strong enough to make the team. I got to cut you. I'm sorry. So
mm.
again, it's not the mindset of bombing. It's the mindset of building a set, building a team that this is now a working gag in this whole segment or this set. And if you're strong enough, you're in. If not, next, I'll write another one.
Yeah. Do you think God has a pretty good sense of humor?
I have absolutely. What's funny to me is when people think that God does not have a sense of humor. I did a sermon on this. Maybe there'll be a book some point. But God invented humor, so He understands irony, sarcasm, hyperbole, simile. He tells us stories with humor. He is crude. It talks about dung and bowels, and he understands earthy humor. He understands our personality so well that it says God laughs at us. It's not That's not just that a merry heart doeth good like medicine. Yeah, I get it. Anger dries the bones. Yeah, that's good. But God laughs. And if it says he laughs, he has a sense of humor. And I can go through the Bible and tell you, first off, you should know that Jesus used humor in his talks. Many people think they look at this Bible and they take every single word as this is very serious. At that time, it was a form called Chinese exaggeration. You made everything huge and you exaggerated so big, but everybody knew what you were talking about. And that's what the story of the man with a log in his eye, and you don't notice, you notice a speck in your friend's eye, but you don't notice the log in your own eye. That's huge Chinese exaggeration that was very big in the Middle East at that time. Same thing, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. He's talking to poor people, he's making jokes, and people understand it. It is not a, it is easier for a camel. It's like he wasn't boring. People don't pay attention. I always tell people the miracles helped, obviously, but his speaking style was such that he knew his audience and he knew exactly what made them laugh. He knew exactly what would make them cry. He knew exactly what would move them to action. And when someone came up to him and said, like, hey, I do everything really well. What am I lacking? He says, what you're lacking is you got to give all your money away. Oh, crap. You think Jesus didn't know that guy? He knew exactly who he was. Jesus knows his audience because they're all his children.
Mm.
And he takes such great joy. Why do you think babies giggle so much? Because God gave them an infectious laugh to make us laugh, to release our tension. No, God has a sense of humor, and He gave it to each one of us to just balance out life because life is hard. Could you imagine a God who didn't have a sense of humor? How cruel would that be? I'm going to put you down on this planet where there's nothing to have fun with. No laughter, no joy. No, laughter is a hint of what we're going to get in heaven. Believe me, there'll be huge laughs in heaven. Guarantee it.
Amen. Yeah. And for you, what's the future hold for you? I know you said you want to travel some more in other countries, and as well as you don't plan on retiring. So, what goals, ambitions do you still have left in you that you want to accomplish?
My next book, it's the story of Job told as a Princess Bride fairy tale. So I'm just finished.
Really?
Yeah, so that I've this one I'm just so proud of. I love this one. It'll be released in Christmas. I'm getting it to the publisher. I've got a week now to finish it up. I've been rewriting, tweaking, and rewriting. I always say it's like as if C.S. Lewis and Monty Python told the story of Job. It's like a fractured fairy tale. So, and that's what adaptation is. You take a story. It's the oldest story of mankind, and let's have the story of what happens when you lose everything and you have to go to the king and say, why did this happen? So I've set it in a kingdom. And so there's an allegory, obviously, of God and Job. And so that's coming out. So I'm very excited about that. I've got a list of other books that my wife and I are going to write a book. By the way, I'll give you the title. The title of that last one's called it's Percival the Altruistic. And so that's the title of it. And that's the story. My wife and I are writing a book on marriage because she's a therapist. So, and our book is a comedian and a therapist walk into a marriage. So that's that. Well, that book will be coming next. I've got a couple other books in mind, but I also have comedy projects in mind. I love to do. It's like every couple of years, here's a new comedy project. My next one is going to be released hopefully within this month. It's called Comic. And then I'm doing my second Dry Bar special in another month. That'll be out in another 6 months or so, maybe a year. You never know how long Dry Bar is going to take. But I'm recording that in September. So I've got my book, I've got my comedy special, I've got my Dry Bar special, and that's just in 25 or 24. Most everything will be released in 25. And I don't know what is up next. I have, again, things on the docket, but God could take me on a total left-hand turn. I'd love to turn my um, story of Job, the Percival the Altruistic, into a movie script. So I probably will. I'll adapt that into a movie script as soon as it gets published because it's just it. People said, this is a movie. I go, yeah, that's why I wrote it. So anyway, that'd be fun.
Who would you have play the characters, you think? Any ideas?
Oh, I would love to have Emily Blunt and John Krasinski, husband and wife team, play Job and actually a love interest is, and I'd love to have Charlize Theron play his wife. But these are big, huge, big stars. So, but yeah, there's a lot of people that I'm thinking, okay, it's like this. You go shoot for the stars, and you go down to the next level.
Sure. Sure. Cool. Well, Robert, this was a lot of fun. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to leave with the audience?
Well, if describe your audience for me. Is it just people who are looking to go into entertainment, or I mean, how? What advice do they need?
Sure. I mean, this audience could be basically all over. I mean, the channel is called Worldviews, so we just investigate people's worldviews and where it came to be and where it is now. So it could be people of different religious backgrounds, all maybe comedic backgrounds. I'll probably post this on numerous platforms that are involve comedy, so it could be just for really anyone. So I guess act like it's a cruise ship to some degree.
Well, if I think worldview is the most important decision you can come to in your life. It's how you see the world, how you view the world dictates everything. And for me, I have a Christian worldview because I have come to the conclusion that it is inescapable that God created everything. And it's a screwy system, and I understand why people don't like it. And the only method we have is us. It's the only method he has, excuse me, to fix the world. He's not going to do miracles. He goes, no, my Holy Spirit is in you. And so, from my perspective, I believe that we have to do two things. And it's very clear. You have to love God, you have to love your neighbor. And if that's why the book is called The Altruistic, Percival the Altruistic. That's someone who is a benefactor, someone who gives to others. I just see a lot of wealth out in Hollywood. I see a lot of people who are very unhappy. And the solution to it is really forget about yourself, acknowledge there's a creator who created you, and then give of yourself and your talents to other people. And that actually is the secret to happiness. Everybody's looking for happiness in the wrong places. So if I have one final thing to say, it's like just love God as much as you possibly can, and love your friends, your family, and your neighbors, and try to outgive each other. That is, to me, the answer to life. As this old guy who's still a comedian and still working, that's what I believe is the answer that would solve a multitude of problems in this world.
Amen. Outstanding wisdom, Robert. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.